Ma'am, can I speak with you for a moment?
Sure, officer. What's the issue?
We had a report of a possible suspect matching your
I
description.
work for the DEA. My badge is in my purse. I can show it.
DEA? Are you?
Yes, sir.
Hang on. Just stay right there a second, okay?
The Boca Raton Town Center Mall on a Tuesday afternoon has a particular kind of energy. Unhurried, almost indulgent. It is the kind of place where time moves slower than it should, where the scent of a Cinnabon drifts down the hall and mixes with the sanitized cool of air conditioning, and where the most dramatic thing that typically happens is a disagreement over a parking space in the garage. November 14th, 2023, 2:37 in the afternoon. The holiday shopping season had begun its slow creep into the retail landscape. Window displays were already dressed with frosted pine and gold ribbon. The Nordstrom near the main entrance was doing brisk business, and the foot traffic flowed steadily. Families with strollers, couples holding coffee cups, teenagers in groups navigating the corridor with the casual authority only teenagers possess. And then there was Dana Mosley. She had not planned to be at the mall that day. If you asked her later, she would tell you, quietly, professionally, with the same measured restraint she applied to nearly everything, that she had only stopped in to pick up a birthday gift for her niece. She'd had the morning off, a rarity in her schedule, and she'd taken it. She deserved that much. She was 36 years old, 5'7", natural hair, a full, close-cropped coil that she wore with no particular statement in mind, only comfort. She had on a dark green bomber jacket, the kind with a slight sheen over a white-fitted top. Dark jeans, clean white Air Force Ones. 2 shopping bags hung from her left hand, one from Nordstrom, one from a smaller accessory boutique down the hall. Her phone was in her right hand, open to a receipt she was cross-checking against a return policy. To anyone paying attention, she looked exactly like what she was. A professional woman on her day off, doing what millions of Americans do every single week. But Officer Timothy Raymond was not paying close attention. He was paying a different kind of attention. The kind shaped not by facts, but by assumptions. The kind that fills in blanks before blanks need filling. The kind that had gotten officers across this country into headlines, into hearings, and in some cases, into courtrooms. A call had come in. A vague, low-specificity report of a woman acting suspiciously near the Nordstrom entrance. The description offered to dispatch. Black woman, dark jacket, carrying bags, acting nervous. Dana Mosley was not nervous. But she was black. She was wearing a dark jacket. She was carrying bags. And for Officer Raymond, that was apparently sufficient. The Bodycam footage, later reviewed by Internal Affairs, Regional DEA Command, and ultimately obtained by 3 separate media outlets, begins at 14:37:22. Officer Raymond's HUD data shows his GPS coordinates, placing him approximately 40 feet from the Nordstrom entrance when he first spots Agent Mosley. He walks toward her with purpose, closing the gap quickly. She doesn't notice him immediately. She's looking at her phone. Ma'am, ma'am, stop right there. His voice carries an edge that is not quite aggression, but is close enough to it that 3 bystanders, visible in the background of the footage, immediately slow their pace and turn to look. The teenagers near the store window stop entirely. Dana Mosley looks up. And here is what the camera captures, and what every single person who later watched that footage would comment on. She does not panic. She does not startle. She does not shrink. She straightens, almost imperceptibly, and looks at Officer Raymond with an expression of composed, professional alertness. This was not the look of someone caught doing something wrong. This was the look of someone who had seen this before, possibly many times before. Okay, she said. What seems to be the problem, officer? Her voice, calm, level. The kind of calm that is not accidental but trained, the kind of level that has been practiced in high-pressure situations in rooms and environments that most people will never see. Officer Raymond, however, appeared to interpret her composure not as the indicator of professionalism it was, but as something else. In the footage, you can see his posture shift, his shoulders square, his right hand drifts instinctively toward his duty belt. Not drawing, but drifting. "We received a call about a woman matching your description in this area," he said. "I'm going to need to see some ID, and I need you to put those bags down." The crowd around them, the slow drift of a Tuesday afternoon mall, had begun to coagulate. People were stopping, not rushing over, not creating a scene themselves, but stopping, pausing, watching with a specific kind of wary attention that had become part of the American experience. The recognition that what they were witnessing might matter, that they might be witnesses to something. 3 phones came out, then a 4th. Dana Mosley set one bag down, slowly, deliberately, with the practiced control of someone who understood that every movement she made in this moment was being read, assessed, and potentially misread. "I'm going to reach into my jacket," she said. "Slowly. I need you to stay calm." It was an interesting thing to say. I need you to stay calm. Because she was the one being stopped. She was the one being told to put her bags down in the middle of a shopping mall on her day off, in front of a growing crowd of strangers with phones out. And yet it was she who was managing the de-escalation. It was she who was making sure the situation did not spiral. Officer Raymond did not appear to recognize the significance of this inversion. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Just wait. What?" His voice broke slightly on that last word, because Dana Mosley's hand had cleared her jacket, and in it was something Officer Timothy Raymond had not been prepared for. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We've got viewers tuned in from across the country and around the world. Let us know your city and state. What Dana Mosley produced from her jacket was a credential wallet. Black, official, federal government issue. She held it open and extended it toward Officer Raymond with a steady arm. He stared at it. The crowd, now perhaps 40 people deep, some stopped mid-stride, some actively filming, watched in silence. The mall's ambient music continued playing. A cheerful, bouncy instrumental version of a pop song that felt almost surreal against the gravity of the scene unfolding below the skylight. On the badge, the seal of the United States Department of Justice. On the credential card, a photograph of Dana Mosley, professional, direct, unsmiling as federal ID photos tend to be. A name, a title, Special Agent, Drug Enforcement Administration. Officer Raymond's jaw moved slightly. His eyes moved from the credential to Dana Mosley's face and back to the credential. He did not immediately speak. This was the moment, the 4 or 5 seconds of silence captured on the body cam that would be replayed thousands of times. On news segments, on YouTube commentary channels, in training seminars at police academies, in the testimony later given to an internal affairs investigator. Those 4 seconds said something that no script could have written. He had not expected this. The assumption he had arrived with, built on a vague call, a visual assessment, and a constellation of biases he may not have even been consciously aware of, had run at full speed, directly into the wall of reality. He started. A second officer, Officer Renee Brandt, who had been hanging back near the corridor wall, stepped forward and looked at the credential. Her reaction was faster. Her face changed immediately. She reached for Raymond's arm. "Tim." Her voice was low, urgent. He heard something in that single syllable, enough to make him take a step back. Around them, the crowd had grown. People who had been walking toward the food court had stopped. A mall security guard, who had been lazily monitoring the entrance from 30 feet away, was now on his radio. The teenage girls who had stopped to watch were whispering to each other, phones raised. A man in a polo shirt, maybe 50 years old, had his phone recording and had audibly said, She's a cop. He stopped a cop. He was wrong about the exact title, but not about the substance. Dana Mosley still had not raised her voice. She had not moved from her position. She stood with a stillness that communicated something more powerful than any shout could have. I have nothing to prove that I haven't already proven, but we are going to get through this correctly. I suggest, she said quietly, her eyes steady on Raymond, that you contact your supervisor. It was not a request, but it was framed as one, precisely because Dana Mosley was a professional, and professionals do not detonate when they can de-escalate, even when they are the ones being wronged. Officer Brandt had already keyed her radio. Let us take a moment to understand exactly who was standing in that mall corridor on November 14th, 2023. Because the institution Officer Raymond had just attempted to detain deserves to be fully seen. Special Agent Dana Renee Mosley, born in Atlanta, Georgia, 1987. The middle child of a schoolteacher mother and a logistics manager father. Raised in Decatur. Attended Spelman College on an academic scholarship, where she majored in criminal justice with a minor in sociology. She graduated with honors. She was the kind of student her professors remembered, not because she was loudest in the room, but because she was consistently the most prepared. She joined the DEIA at 24 after 2 years working with the Atlanta Police Department's Narcotics Intelligence Division as a civilian analyst. She was recruited by a federal recruiter who described her in his notes as analytically exceptional and operationally composed. She cleared every phase of DEA training at Quantico with marks that placed her in the top 12% of her cohort. Over a 12-year career with the Drug Enforcement Administration, Special Agent Dana Mosley had worked in 3 field divisions, Atlanta, Miami, and most recently, the Miami Field Division's Boca Raton resident office. She had been part of task forces that had resulted in the dismantling of 2 mid-level narcotics distribution networks operating across the I-95 corridor. She had testified in federal court on 6 separate occasions. She had received a commendation from the DEA Administrator's Office in 2021 for outstanding investigative work on a cross-jurisdictional trafficking case that had taken 3 years to close. She carried a federal law enforcement credential. She carried a standard-issue sidearm. She was, by every measurable standard, not just a law enforcement officer. She was a senior federal law enforcement officer whose jurisdiction and authority exceeded that of the local officer who had just told her to put her bags down. She was on her day off. She had been shopping for her niece's birthday present. When Sergeant Patricia Dolan arrived on scene, responding to Officer Brandt's radio call, she took one look at the credential Dana Mosley was still holding open, closed her eyes briefly in the way that people do when they are processing something unwelcome, and said, "Agent Mosley, I am so sorry." Dana Mosley nodded once. She said nothing else. The sergeant then turned to Officer Raymond. The Bodycam captures that moment. His face, and it is worth describing this carefully because it is important, had gone through several phases in the past 4 minutes. Initial authority, uncertainty, confusion, and now something that sat between embarrassment and a specific kind of dread. The dread of someone who is beginning to understand the full weight of what they have done, in public, on camera, to a federal agent, in a crowded mall. He started to speak. Dolan held up a hand. Not unkindly, but firmly. "Not right now, Raymond." The crowd had not dispersed. If anything, it had grown. People had gathered at a respectful distance, respectful not because they were disinterested, but because they understood they were watching something that mattered. Someone in the back said, loud enough to be heard, "That man needs to be fired." Someone else replied, "That's the least of what needs to happen." Officer Raymond stood still. The Bodycam kept recording. The immediate scene was resolved within the next 12 minutes. Sergeant Dolan spoke briefly and privately with Agent Mosley, who provided her DEA field office contact information and indicated she would be making a formal report. She was professional. She was precise. She collected her shopping bags, both of them because she had come to shop, and she had every legal and human right to finish doing so. And she walked calmly out of the section of the corridor that had become, for the past quarter of an hour, a spectacle. The crowd dispersed slowly. Mall security worked to clear the corridor. The teenage girls left. The man in the polo shirt uploaded his footage. By 4 p.m., a 17-second clip was circulating on social media. By 8 p.m., it had accumulated over 400,000 views. By the following morning, it had crossed 2 million. The clip showed just enough. An officer stopping a black woman in a mall. Her quiet, controlled response. The extension of a credential. The visible shift in the officer's body language. The arrival of a supervisor. The one-word apology. It did not need context. People understood what they were seeing. Within 24 hours, the Boca Raton Police Department released a brief statement acknowledging the incident and stating that an internal review had been initiated. It was a careful statement, the kind of statement institutional communications departments craft when they are trying to acknowledge without admitting. It said nothing about Officer Raymond by name. It said nothing about policy failures. It said the department was committed to professional and unbiased policing. The DEA's Miami Field Division did not release a public statement. They did not need to. Agent Mosley's supervisor contacted the BRPD chief's office directly through proper channels, in the language that federal agencies speak when they want something understood without being said loudly. The internal affairs investigation was opened the same day. Officer Timothy Raymond, a 7-year veteran of the Boca Raton Police Department, with no prior sustained complaints in his file, but with 2 prior informal complaints that had been resolved without escalation, was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His patrol assignment was suspended. His Bodycam footage was submitted to the review board. The investigation focused on several questions. What was the nature of the original call? Who made it? What specific behavior had Agent Mosley engaged in that warranted the level of contact Raymond initiated? What was the process by which Raymond approached the stop? Meaning, had he followed department protocol for initiating a contact based on a vague third-party tip? And critically, would the same approach have been used with a different person matching a different description? The answers to these questions, as they emerged over the following 6 weeks, were not comfortable ones. The original call, reviewed from dispatch records, described a woman acting nervously and looking around frequently. This is, it must be stated plainly, a description that could apply to virtually anyone in a shopping mall. The caller did not describe any criminal behavior. No theft, no threatening conduct, no disturbance, nervousness and eye movement. And from that, Officer Raymond had built an approach that culminated in confronting a senior federal agent in front of 40 witnesses and 4 cameras. The review board's preliminary findings, issued in January 2024, sustained the complaint. The finding documented that Officer Raymond had failed to meet the threshold required for a valid investigative stop, that his approach had been disproportionate to the information available to him, and that the totality of the interaction demonstrated a pattern of decision-making inconsistent with department use of force and engagement guidelines. The recommendation: termination of employment. Raymond's union filed a grievance. The process, as these processes do, took time. But the outcome of the formal process was, in some ways, secondary to a different kind of outcome, the one that had already occurred in real time in a mall corridor, in front of 40 people and a growing number of phone cameras, because the public had already rendered its own verdict, and it had done so within hours. The videos went everywhere. Commentary channels analyzed the footage frame by frame. Legal experts were interviewed on television discussing the legality of the stop, the implications for the officer, and the broader patterns the incident illustrated. Several civil rights attorneys publicly noted that had Mosley not been a federal agent, had she simply been a black woman with no official credentials to produce, the situation could have followed a very different trajectory. There is a version of this story that some people, upon hearing it, find comforting. The federal agent revealed her badge. The system recognized her authority. The officer faced consequences. Justice, in this version, worked. But there is another version of this story, the one that doesn't have a comforting ending, because it doesn't have a comforting premise. Dana Mosley was not stopped because she was doing anything wrong. She was stopped because of an assumption built in the seconds between a vague dispatch call and a human decision about whom to approach, how quickly, with what tone, and with what level of prior suspicion already loaded. The assumption was not neutral. It was shaped, as assumptions in these situations so frequently are, by the oldest and most persistent distortions in American public life. The idea, encoded not in law, but in practice, in instinct, in reflex, that a black person in a public space occupies that space under a different set of invisible conditions than their white counterparts, that their presence requires more justification, that their movements invite more scrutiny, that their composure is suspicious where another person's composure would be unremarkable. Officer Raymond's mistake was not simply procedural. It was not just a failure to hit the legal threshold for a Terry stop. Those are real failures, and they have real consequences. But the procedural failure was downstream of something larger, a moment of human judgment that had been preloaded with inaccurate information. The uncomfortable question that this story leaves behind is not, what happens to Officer Raymond? That question, however important, is a question about one man. The larger question is, how many Dana Mosleys are stopped every day who don't have a federal badge to produce? How many black men and women are stopped in malls, on streets, in parking lots, outside their own homes, based on descriptions just as vague, by officers whose assumptions are just as unexamined, and who have nothing in their wallet that changes the outcome? What happens in the version of this story where the woman in the green bomber jacket is a teacher, or a nurse, or an accountant, or a college student? Where the credential wallet doesn't exist, we know what can happen. The history is long enough. This is not an indictment of every officer who wears a badge. The story, if you watch it carefully, includes Officer Brandt, who responded correctly, Sergeant Dolan, who de-escalated with professionalism. There are people in law enforcement who do this work with integrity, day after day, without fanfare. But institutions are not defined only by their best actors. They are also defined by their failure points, by the moments when the gap between stated values and actual practice becomes visible. This was one of those moments, caught on camera, witnessed by 40 people, replayed by millions. Dana Mosley handled it with a grace and a professionalism that she should never have been asked to demonstrate in a mall on her day off. The fact that she was composed in that moment, the fact that she de-escalated rather than escalated, managed the situation rather than reacted to it, is a testament to who she is. But it is also a testament to something harder, the fact that Black Americans in this country have often had to be better, calmer, more measured, and more careful than the people and systems treating them unjustly. That is not a small thing to ask of someone. That is not a small thing to expect as routine. What would accountability look like, if not only for the officer involved, but for the systems that trained him? The culture that shaped his assumptions, the processes that allow vague complaints to trigger confrontations, and the patterns that make one version of this story survivable because of a badge and another version potentially not. That is the question this footage leaves behind. Not answered by the camera, not resolved by the clip. Still live, still unresolved, like the ending beat of that Bodycam clip. The verification has occurred. But the tension remains. What would you have done if you were in that situation? Leave a comment below. We want to hear from you. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe for more real-life police body cam stories that go beyond the headlines and into the full truth. Every story matters. Every frame counts.